Most baseball stories start with a home run. This one starts with a kid holding a sign. And by the end of the night, more people were talking about what happened between Shohei Ohtani and that young fan than they were talking about the actual game. Because at first, it looked like Ohtani had done something completely unexpected. He said no, not politely avoiding it, not pretending he didn't see it, not walking away. He simply denied a young fan's unusual request. The crowd noticed, the cameras noticed, the broadcasters noticed. And for a few uncomfortable moments, thousands of people inside the stadium were wondering the exact same thing. Why would Shohei Ohtani say no? Especially to a kid. Especially when Ohtani has built a reputation as one of the most generous and respectful athletes in professional sports. But what nobody realized at that moment was that Ohtani wasn't rejecting the fan. He was planning something nobody in the ballpark saw coming. And when it finally happened, the reaction was so emotional that even veteran broadcasters struggled to find the right words. But before we get there, you need to understand why this moment became such a huge story. Because Shohei Ohtani isn't just another baseball player anymore. He's become something much bigger. Every stadium he visits feels different. Every road trip feels different. Every batting practice session feels different. Fans don't simply watch Ohtani, they chase him. Hours before games begin, crowds gather around the railings hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Kids arrive carrying handmade signs. Parents line up for photos. Entire sections of stadiums fill with fans wearing Dodgers blue even when Los Angeles is playing hundreds of miles from home. It's become one of the defining images of modern baseball. And nowhere is that more obvious than during batting practice. For most players, batting practice is routine. For Ohtani, it's an event. The moment he steps onto the field, phones come out, conversations stop, eyes follow every movement. Fans hope for one thing: a baseball, a wave, a signature, anything, especially the kids. Because to them, Ohtani isn't just an athlete, he's a superhero. A player who hits towering home runs one day and strikes out hitters at nearly 100 miles per hour the next. Someone who seems capable of doing things nobody else can do. Which brings us to the young fan. Several rows above the dugout sat a boy holding a sign that immediately caught attention. The sign wasn't asking for a baseball. It wasn't asking for a photo. It wasn't even asking for an autograph. The request was far more unusual. According to people nearby, the young fan wanted Ohtani to use his bat during the game and then give it to him afterward. Think about that for a second. Not a baseball. Not a batting glove. Not a signature. His actual game bat. The bat Ohtani would potentially use during a major league game. It was the kind of request that instantly stood out. Fans around him laughed. Parents pointed it out. People started taking pictures of the sign, and eventually word reached the field. As batting practice continued, Ohtani noticed the sign. For a brief moment, he looked directly toward the section. The crowd immediately became excited. Maybe he was going to acknowledge it. Maybe he was going to toss a ball. Maybe something special was about to happen. Instead, Ohtani smiled, shook his head, and continued walking. That was it. A simple no. The reaction was immediate. Some fans laughed. Others looked surprised. A few people seemed disappointed for the young fan. Even the broadcasters later joked about the request. Because let's be honest, a game-used Ohtani bat is one of the most valuable pieces of baseball memorabilia on the planet. Players don't just hand those out, especially not before a game. Especially not when they may need that bat later. The young fan seemed disappointed. Not devastated, just disappointed. Like any kid would be. He had taken a shot, and it hadn't worked. At least that's what everyone thought. The game began. The crowd settled into their seats. And slowly, attention shifted back to baseball. Or at least it did for everyone except Shohei Ohtani. Because while the rest of the stadium had moved on, Ohtani clearly hadn't forgotten. And what happened over the next few hours would reveal exactly why he's respected by teammates, coaches, opponents, and fans all around the world. Because sometimes the most memorable moments don't happen when a player says yes. Sometimes they happen because he says no first. And by the middle innings, nobody in the stadium had any idea that Ohtani was quietly preparing a response that would leave the entire ballpark speechless. As the game moved along, Ohtani did what Ohtani always does. He played baseball. And once again, he made it look effortless. Every time he stepped into the batter's box, the energy inside the stadium changed. Fans stood up, phones appeared, people stopped talking. Because with Ohtani, every at-bat feels like it could become a highlight, a towering home run, a rocket double, a moment that gets replayed around the world. The young fan was still watching, still holding the sign, still hoping. But by this point, most people assumed the story was over. The request had been denied. End of discussion. Except Ohtani kept glancing toward that section throughout the game. Not constantly. Not enough for television cameras to notice, but enough that people sitting nearby would later talk about it. And then came one of the biggest moments of the night. Ohtani stepped to the plate in a crucial situation. The crowd rose to its feet. The pitcher worked carefully. Nobody wanted to make a mistake. Everyone knew what could happen if he got something to hit. Then it happened. Crack. The sound exploded through the stadium. The baseball jumped off the bat and soared into the night sky. Fans immediately stood. Outfielders barely moved. The ball was gone. Another Ohtani home run. Another unforgettable moment. The stadium erupted. Dodgers fans celebrated. Teammates greeted him at home plate. The usual scene. But there was one detail most people didn't notice. Ohtani handed that bat to a clubhouse attendant after the inning. Not unusual. Players rotate bats all the time. Nobody thought anything of it. The game continued. The Dodgers pushed toward victory. The crowd remained electric. And still the young fan sat there. Still holding the sign. Still hoping for something. Anything. Meanwhile, inside the Dodgers dugout, conversations were happening. A few players had noticed the sign earlier. Some had laughed. Others thought it was creative. Eventually, word spread through the dugout. Even coaches became aware of it. And according to people close to the team, Ohtani asked a few questions. Where was the kid sitting? Was he still there? Had someone spoken to him? Nothing dramatic, just quiet questions. The kind of questions nobody would think much about at the time. But they mattered, because Ohtani was already thinking several steps ahead. This is one of the things teammates often mention about him. He's thoughtful, deliberate, intentional. He rarely does things for attention. If he does something, there's usually a reason, and as the final innings approached, that reason was about to become very clear. The Dodgers secured the win. Fans began celebrating. People started preparing to leave. The game itself was essentially over, but the biggest moment of the entire night hadn't happened yet. Not even close. Because while everyone else thought the story ended with Ohtani saying no, the real story was only beginning. And what happened after the final out would become the moment fans remembered long after they forgot the final score. The final out landed in a glove. The Dodgers had won. Players began exchanging handshakes. Fans started heading toward the exits. Another successful night of baseball. Or so they thought. Then something unusual happened. Instead of immediately disappearing into the clubhouse, Ohtani stayed on the field. At first, nobody thought much about it. Players often sign autographs after games. Sometimes they toss balls into the crowd. Nothing unusual. But Ohtani wasn't heading toward the nearest fans. He was heading toward one specific section. The section where the young fan had been sitting all night. People started noticing. Heads turned. Fans pointed. The broadcasters picked up on it. And suddenly thousands of people were watching the exact same thing. Ohtani walked directly toward the boy. The same boy whose request he had denied hours earlier. The same boy who had asked for a game-used bat. The same boy everyone assumed had been disappointed. Security helped create a path. The crowd grew quieter. Nobody knew what was happening. Then Ohtani reached into a bag being carried by a team staff member. And suddenly everything made sense. Inside the bag was the bat. Not just any bat. The actual game-used bat from earlier in the night. The same bat that had been used during the game. The same bat many fans had assumed would never leave Ohtani's possession. The young fan looked stunned. For a second, he didn't even move. Neither did his parents. Neither did most of the crowd. People simply stared, trying to process what they were seeing. Because Ohtani hadn't really denied the request at all. He had delayed it. He couldn't give away the bat before the game. He might need it. But afterward, that was a different story. The reaction was immediate. Cheers erupted throughout the stadium. Fans began applauding. People pulled out phones. Broadcasters couldn't stop talking about it. The young fan looked completely overwhelmed. And honestly, who wouldn't be? One moment you're sitting in the stands holding a sign. The next you're holding a game-used bat from the biggest star in baseball. But Ohtani wasn't finished. He signed the bat, took photos, spent a few moments speaking with the family, then quietly walked away. No celebration, no dramatic gesture, no attempt to make it about himself. Just a simple act of kindness. And somehow that made it even more powerful. Because that's what separates Ohtani from so many athletes. The gesture wasn't about publicity. It wasn't about attention. It was about making one kid's night unforgettable. And judging by the reaction around the stadium, he succeeded. Fans continued talking about it long after he left the field. Commentators mentioned it during post-game coverage. Videos spread across social media. People who hadn't even watched the game suddenly wanted to see what had happened. Not because of a home run. Not because of a strikeout. Because of a moment. A human moment. A reminder that sports are about more than statistics, more than championships, more than records. They're about memories. And on a night when everyone expected Shohei Ohtani's biggest contribution to come with a bat in his hands, his most memorable moment came after the game was already over. He said no. Then he turned that no into something far better than a yes. And in doing so, he created the kind of story fans remember for years. The score will eventually be forgotten. The standings will change, new games will be played. But somewhere, one young fan will always remember the night Shohei Ohtani denied his unusual request, and then gave him something even more incredible than he ever imagined.